Let's maybe, yeah, it's 3:33, so I think that's good. There's quite a few people on YouTube, I think. So.
All right. Well, welcome. I'm Corey Beeg. I'm the program director for architecture here at the University of Texas at Austin School of Architecture. And it's my pleasure to introduce Maxi Spina. Maxi is co-director of the Los Angeles-based research and design studio Spinagu with his partner Gia Yigu. This semester, we are incredibly honored to have both Maxi and Gia join our faculty as Eugene McDermott Centennial Visiting Professors. Maxi was born in Rosario, Argentina, city of Lionel Messi, is on the faculty of the Southern California Institute of Architecture, SCI-Arc, where he also serves as the undergraduate thesis coordinator. He was previously a McDowell Colony Fellow and Maybeck Fellow at UC Berkeley, and is taught as a visiting professor with Gia at Syracuse University and as an associate professor at Woodbury University. Gia, whose work is focused on media-based practices and exhibition making and architecture, was born in Shanghai, China, city of one of my favorite directors, Wong Kar-wai, and is the director of the Max Center for Art and Architecture in Los Angeles. She is a doctoral candidate at UCLA, where her research is focused on the production of models and post-war architectural practices. Much like I would imagine a chimerical mix of Lionel Messi and Wong Kar-wai being, for many reasons, amazing, the office of Spinagu is in many ways not so dissimilar. The work of Spinagu does not reflect the blending of two very similar partners, but rather the coupling of very different people who have come together to build something new while retaining the uniqueness, differences, and sensibilities of their individual pursuits. Spinagu represents addition, two global theorists who are redefining what it means to be a contemporary architecture practice today. Maxi and Gia are part of what I would consider a new wave of generalists capable of covering large territories in our discipline, and to me represent a shift away from the intense specialization we saw in the early 2000s, when an architect's capacity or potential was often only activated through affiliations and collaborations with others. While Spinagu has many collaborators, the collaborations are not formed to fill gaps because there are none, or to utilize a few select strengths because there are many, but to increase the depth and range of the conversation, to expand the chimera through addition. Spinagu has been very active, exhibiting work at the Venice Biennale as part of the appropriately named Architectural Bestia group exhibition, at the Ohio State University, SCI-Arc Gallery, A&D Museum, and the Jai and Jai Gallery. They've also been featured in Architect Magazine's Next Progressives, and their work has been published in Architectural Record, Domus, Architect's Newspaper, and more. In addition to multiple AIA awards, Maxi's project Other Turns was one of our winners at our very own Secret Life of Buildings competition in 2016 here at the University of Texas at Austin. So in many ways, this is a welcome back to Maxi. And with that, please give me a warm, join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to Maxi Spina.
Thank you so much, Corey, for the amazing introduction. And I'll say thank you more generally for the invitation to join UT Austin this semester, where my partner, Gia Gu, who is unfortunately not here lecturing with me today. We're currently teaching this spring housing studio, which I welcome you guys to drop by and in the different reviews that we have this spring. Also want to thank you for the opportunity to share our work today. I should mention Gia, she's the half of everything I will show today, and she's half of more of our driving practice in the office daily, conceptually out there speaking and so forth. I wanted today's presentation to function in a number of ways, like many other lectures, a bit as a kind of survey of our recent work, talk a little bit about the things we've been thinking about and building up as part of our, relatively young office, speaking specifically about our partnership, and also lecture try to function as an opportunity to share a little bit of reflections about our practice. So I'm going to be showing 6 projects. As a studio, we're interested in interrogating architectural modes of production in order to understand and perhaps subvert some of the habitual ways that we work in architecture. And I don't think as these subversions as very radical, as dramatic breaks, but rather more as small commentaries, a small thought linked to other thoughts that produce a bit of a kind of chain link of ideas. Many of the works I'll present today explore this notion that we call surfacing work. And at the core of it, there is a tension between views and viewing, and between scenes and screens. I would like to exploit that tension in order to turn our attention to how such techniques of viewing can similarly affect modes of thinking and making, and vice versa. If there is a reference point in which we can conceptually situate this notion of surfacing work, will be somewhere along the arc that theater historian Arnold Aronson used to describe the history of scenography as a kind of pendulum swinging between a battle with space and a battle with the image. For us, we find that architecture occupies a self-similar category between an impetus on one hand for image making, and on the other hand, an impulse for space making. So the survey that we'll show today will span multiple scales. It covers a broad range of interests and agendas, from explorations on neighborhood houses to reflections of the role of digital environment in software, and they begin to condition our material understandings. So the first project that I will show, it's back to 2016. We were asked to put, and this project functions a little bit like a kind of conceptual position. We were asked to put an installation in a hotel room. This was an invitation as a result of a series of calls called One Night Stand LA. It's a series of exhibitions. This one was took place in a motel in Los Angeles. And we were asked to put a project that was meant to be critical of the installation as a medium of architecture experimentation. The call series was called The Last Call for the installation, which kind of shaped the scope of the kind of critical approach that we ended up taking in this project. We were all assigned a hotel room. Our project just began with a kind of naive question: what can we put in this room? Specifically, what can you put in a room that can be understood as a body of work in an installation context, yet a project that doesn't attempt to be an installation in order to make a commentary about supposedly the last installation, which you will find out later it wasn't the last. So also we ask ourselves, what does it mean to work, to show work in a hotel room? So all the rooms in the hotel looked the same. It was the only thing you could see, and perhaps the thing you could not unsee as you move from one room to another. It's this kind of mortgage floral bed, perfectly framed by mahogany walls and lamps, and calm patches of carpet and sticky electrical outlets. Material transitions between bathroom tiles to vinyl sheets or carpet to baseboard were crusty, full of occupant sheddings like hair, flakes, and dust, which compressed to a kind of black regime. One was not inclined to relax in it, in a space like this. It was the precise opposite of a white cube. It was full of materialities, it was full of distractions and imperfections. Yet because all the rooms were seen as equal, it surprises to see that the hotel room operated in the same way as a gallery space, ubiquitous, conditioning, and seemingly a neutral space for architectural display. Other architects use the room as a site of their work in Glee, as a prop, as supporting architecture, as a screen, as containers of things, as holders of space, as a place where you will put something. We didn't want to put anything in the room, not lamps, not screens, not stuff, not even ourselves. Knowing that the primary reception of the work will be through images, through photographs and Instagram, we wanted to test the verisimilitude of the image. We began to think about the room as an image, as background to the work. And we wonder whether this background, which was usually never seen as the work, but only separate from it, could be made into a foreground. We proposed to construct an image of the room. By construct, what we mean is construct it semiotically in terms of meaning, but also construct it tectonically in terms of making, at which point the construction of visual scenes often requires measuring, requires joinery, seaming, and assembly. We use surface modeling software, really just Rhino, an image making software, Photoshop, V-Ray, the usual software, to construct an image of a motel within a perspective box of the hotel room. We began with the construction of the box itself. We asked ourselves, does that box sit on the floor? Does it produce a second ground? Is its base triangular? And therefore, one will have to negotiate how to fit an image with 4 walls into a 3-wall space. Is it 5-sided rather than 3? And therefore, you have to consider how to divide an image of a 4-wall space into 5 walls. So we wanted to kind of ask ourselves what the transition between image and space meant between the 3 to 4 to 5-sided perspective box portraying this 4-wall-sided hotel room. What happens when the spatial construction of the room as an image that's not geometrically aligned with the spatial geometry of the box? Those were the initial questions that begin to create or underline that space or that slippage between form and image. So the result was the design of and construction of 2 perspective boxes that were installed in the door and the window of the room. The boxes allowed visitors to see the rooms without ever entering into them, a situation we find like pretty satisfactory. It was difficult to Instagram or to understand through Instagram, which we also found a little bit satisfying as well. Perhaps less satisfactory was that our work, our labor, after all, was not self-evident. So trained was the audience in this type of show to look for the work within the room, that some people, started stepping on it and try to move the perspective boxes to try to get into the room. But this seamlessness between the work and the room is perhaps the point here. After all, this was a project that was not longer trying to make an installation, but trying to make a commentary on architecture's condition of viewing by thinking about how views historically and contemporarily had been configured, how they had been assembled and put together to produce what is perceived to be a seamless visual artifact. Certain well understood surfaces like floors, walls, windows begin to slip in and out of the space. The floor starts to turn and creep up into the wall. The effect of these misalignments, as you can see in the photo of the perspective box, serve to undermine a widely held convention of architecture, which is that each surface necessarily corresponds to a distinct material and its inherent system of construction. A wall is stucco, a floor is wood, so on and so forth. So misfitting an image of a room into the room forces us to develop a distinction between the geometry and construction of the perspective box as an object and the spatial construction implied by the image of that room. So to understand the difference between constructing an object and constructing an image. So these are models that we need to make in order to represent the project, to try to underscore a little bit of the kind of conceptual misalignments and formal misalignments that occur. And the idea here of using a model to delineate the edges of the project, since the photographs of the installation was quite literally impossible to distinguish what was the room and what was the real, what was the real and what was the fake. So the project began to kind of take a second life as a model, as a kind of documentary model of the project, that we began to do and unfold and do with the kind of architect tools of developing surfaces, and also beginning to question, the different kind of materialities, in this case, the materialities of the model that begin to describe different parts of the constituent surfaces. So as I said, that project was a bit of a kind of conceptual positioning, and we continue that approach in other works that we've done in our studio about and beginning to engage and thinking a lot about how the ways in which digital software, digital culture is conditioning our perceptions and habits in architectural design. In 2017, a few months after Room to Review, we got invited to produce yet another exhibition, another installation, so no less call. And this was in the Sire Gallery. The project's named Thick, which is a research project and an exhibition that explores material thickness as an active site of investigation. The research that we did explores how thickness is itself a deep structure of design within the discursive spaces of scripted geometry, digital tooling, material fabrication, and construction. The project produced a collection of fragments that explore the section as an operative act through which both figuration and form begin to emerge. The exhibition attempts to expand on the problems of material thickness through a number of topics, the topics of sections, ruins, fragments, constructions, figurations, simultaneity, and representation. For us, thickness or thick is it's a research project and an exhibition that explores the history and habits of representing an invisible condition to architectural design, which is the notion of material thickness. Over time, architecture has produced a set of representational techniques to describe this unseen dimension of architecture. So, alluded to in section and camouflage in the figure ground and presented as a foil in the developed surface drawing, material thickness is an understudied architectural condition that has served as an elusive site for many acts of design. Thickness evades the elevation and hides out in the edges of projected drawing and is often considered a mere inconvenience of the real within systems of representation. Yet material thickness is a constructed problem as much as it is a representational one. In our present day days standards of construction, thickness has become a synonym with material offset due to the predominance of sheet material, as opposite to stereotomy, in which thickness is treated through subtraction and removal of mass. So the condition of thickness, the necessity, I would say, of thickness, carries no central import in any area of architecture, but it still manages to circulate through different moments of architectural thinking. Its condition is linked to, but it's, I would say, no central to the history of stereotomy and stone construction, in the emergence of new forms of architectural drawing, like the developed surface, and in the classic problem of the Doric order. Even in the modernist obfuscation of solid form, it remains an unavoidable consideration in the Miesian corner and Kistler's endless surfaces. So we started to think about thickness' peripheral role in architecture, almost as a kind of consequence of architecture's lack of medium specificity, in its constant migration between the drawing, the picture plane, the screen, the toolpath, the material, and the assembly. In our contemporary milieu of digital software and environments, this is particularly true. Thickness has become a mere afterthought. In modeling software, the digital model is infinitely thin. And in addition to that, today's softwares embed increasingly fluid commands to carry information between platforms, So the capacity of thickness to serve as a critical problem in digital production has been obfuscated by output commands and mechanic fabrication, and begins to reappear in mechanic production, either in the surfaces of 3D printing or in the excavation of CNC milling. So our project attempts to re-engineer relationship between the material fabrication and digital tooling, and seeks to turn attention to the means by which material condition can similarly affect digital tooling. Similarly, the act of drawing differs in digital space as it does in physical space. While typically perceived through a two-dimensional surface, digital tooling itself is actually embedded with three-dimensional commands. What's visible to us is merely a representation of information, much of which is driven by the conditions of viewing established by the software interface itself. So we wanted objects in the exhibition that will have the perceptual attributes as if one is looking into an axonometric or an elevation oblique. So the projection of a form in depth or the thickening of a wall or bolt will be controlled by a number of different directions or vectors, as in opposition to what automatically offsetting everything a predetermined amount will create. And we also wanted to question this idea of inside and outside and thickness mediating those two conditions. The product always exists in more than one elevation, which begins to call into question the posture of the whole object. Also, the notion of profile in our product thick is further amplified via a myriad of seams that delimit regions of wood grain. In this case, I should say laminate grain. Seams are composed of offsets of portions of profiles or edges. And each of these edges or poly edges then acquire their own spatial standing or posture, and as they enter into a relationship with the neighboring wood grain. The last formal attribute we had in mind was the idea of a more diverse, or if you want, a plural cutaway. We wonder if we could design an artifact in which each functional element, each constituent element, moment, or part could be cut by different planes, obviously without sacrificing material continuity or integrity. So the product was both familiar and elusive. Its formal qualities and contorted profiles demanded visitors to survey the installation on the ground. The use of woods, blonde, brown, gray, and white ash formica laminate invited the viewers to wander between the scale of what it appears an oversized furniture and larger objects and structures that begin to approach the scale of the room. The familiarity of the material and the domestic semblance of the artifacts contrast with the sharply delineated figural outlines of the installation. And it invites visitors and viewers alike to question what is thickness, what is thin of these forms, and and each constituent part, the edges, the surfaces, and wonder about whether these forms are solid, are they stereotomic, are they hollow, and the very kind of formal physical nature of these structures. The use of the formica laminate reference that scale of oversized furniture, and we began to kind of hone into a palette that used this notion of grain that was both the grain that comes from the material itself, but also the grain that we as architects begin to embed into drawings using techniques of representation such as hatching and delineating. So what you see here is trying to get the material and the representation of the material to exist in some level which we exert the right amount of control over the grain and the grain direction. In that way, the product was for us a way to conceive a rigorous exercise in form and construction that could also express that graphic value that had to do with the way we as architects think and project our work through drawing into any public setting, any publication, and just the very act of working through projects. A second project here, it was interesting for us to consider what occurs when this issue of perceived thickness, volumetric thickness, if you want, and ideas of screening and layering moves from the installation into something really much more specific, like domestic architecture. Piaggio House, it's the renovation of a two-story 1960s house that was completed in 2019 in my hometown of Rosario, Argentina. It's a slightly above 2,000 square feet home, proposes to transform typical mechanisms of domestic security and defensive architecture into social infrastructure. And it does so through the strategic delamination of security grates and glass walls. And it attempts to thicken the threshold between interior and outdoor space through flexible verandas. This Argentine courier residence was designed for a really private, non-traditional couple who nonetheless loves indoor-outdoor living. The design that we propose accentuates the overlapping uses of private and semi-private spaces through a layering of recessed volumes, spaces, and windows. As a response to the client's requirements for extra security features like fences, gates, window grates, elements which are typical of single-family homes in this urban neighborhood, a neighborhood, I should say, that was touched by two major financial crises in the 2000s and in 2019. We proposed a strategy which attempted to redefine privacy infrastructure into a framework for what we call social space use. So this strategy of layered voids and the separation of security devices from glass thickens or expands the threshold or entryway of a home and allows it to serve as a flexible multi-use space. In Argentina, these security devices are a common feature of every home. Often, a home will require several layers of such armature to protect the domestic life of its residents against, real or perceived activities of trespassing. Aside of protecting the interior life of the house, such apparatuses are also integral to the way houses conceal, protect, and devise itself against its neighbors and context. Despite their ubiquity, these security devices are often seen as merely ornamental to the house, a prosthetic feature to the architectural design, rather than an integral aspect of the social functions of the house and its position in the urban fabric of the neighborhood. So for this single-family home, we face the constraint of a very narrow plot within a tightly subdivided urban grid. The house sits on a 28-foot wide plot and shares both of its party walls with its neighbors, like many other buildings in Rosario. It is sandwiched between a 1920s street-facing one-story house to the west, which you see on the right of your image, and a recessed two-story cottage to the east, which you see on your left. Piaggio House, with its chamfer corner, acknowledges this neighborhood context of pitch roof cottages We read the profile of the house as a kind of dog ear profile, which kind of calls out the house, like the favorite page of a well-worn book, while connecting seamlessly with the neighboring house. The building's simple rectilinear form is punctured on the street and rear-facing facade by staggered recessed windows, which alternate in a checkerboard pattern of solids and voids. In the front yard, this composition of openings visually doubles the two-story elevation of the house into 4 virtual levels. The house accommodates the everyday rhythms of Argentinian family life, featuring 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and the necessary asador, the barbecue, built-in outdoor grill, where Argentinians religiously eat and conduct their business on weekends. The rooms in the ground floor scheme are organized so that one room flows into another from the street to the backyard. And in the top floor includes a front-facing master bedroom, second bedroom, and an ample study room, both overlooking the backyard. The existing house that we renovated belongs to a kind of weird typology of a single-family house in Argentina called corridor houses, which essentially allows to bypass the house with a side corridor connecting front and backyard. It is a variation of a semi-detached house, but the strictures of a narrow lot push that space to become a partially enclosed double height service corridor, in our case, along the party wall, which is the section drawing that you see on the top. This is another example of how the house absorbs these voids into its mass to create this layered privacy. Our scheme essentially continues that layout all the way to the back, and it creates this one-story tail that contains the laundry room, the utility room, and the barbecue pit. An all-glass sliding door connects the dining and living rooms with the veranda and sun deck on the back, and it allows for glimpses of an all lemon tree, which I don't know if I have a picture of right here. I think that picture is probably missing in the slideshow. We have this U-shaped stair, which is located along the front facade and connects the lower and upper level, while a double height window allows for glimpses over the street beyond the carport canopy, which will be on your left on this image. Sorry, I'm going to go faster through these pictures of the stair, which I think are redundant. On the exterior, the house is clad with white stucco and gives the building that kind of monolithic appearance. It produces a limited, mostly white material palette, and that palette continues throughout the house with cement-grade ceramic tiles that begin to cover the floors inside and out, and painted drywall was used for the interior walls and ceilings. The kitchens and bathrooms are clad in gray vein white Carrara marble. I think those images come a little later, but we wanted to use these simple geometries and layered voids in this house as an exploration on the house infrastructures of privacy and how these might function as a framework for uses and social uses that the house produces. These are a close-up of that checkerboard window pattern during the day and during the night. Looking into the living room, connecting with the veranda through the floor-to-ceiling layer sliding window, and back into the different shades of white and off-white and Carrara vein marble in the kitchen. A few shots of the back by our friend Javier Agustin Rojas of the house. Very cinematic, composed, horizontal images to kind of capture the way these huge pivoting grades begin to open up in the house at night, and an animated shot of that condition at night. So this idea of relating views and viewing, relating scenes and screen, begins to take another dimension when the materiality that we have at hand includes transparency. That was the condition that we started to look at in this particular project. It was a competition organized by the Architectural League called Folly. For this particular call, asked for a greenhouse situated in Socrates Sculpture Park. We wanted to use the project as a way to reflect a little bit on the tensions between orthography and model space, between scenes and screens, and attempt to have glass and begin to kind of render some of the incongruencies that begin to appear as those two spaces that we often as architects interact with begin to get materialized. So that's something we often do in projects, try to use construction means and the traces of construction to begin to have commentaries on both representation and in this case, the kind of programmatic content of the project, which was essentially vegetation and trees inside a glaze environment. So we began with this particular series of animations, which describe this idea of a fixed cube that begins to get wrapped insistently with a ribbon that begins to subtract as it begins to wrap the cube, but also begins to leave a trace of the direction in which it's wrapped. So the orthographic positioning of the cube and the endless 360-degree turning of the ribbon around the cube begin to present that duality between an orthographic form of viewing and a skewed form of viewing, or axonometric form of view, if you want. What we used to materialize the product was a channel glass, in this case with a semicircular profile, in order to give the product a certain kind of rigidity. But we also wanted to have the materiality begin to speak its own language through and portray its own version of nature inside the greenhouse and in the context of Socrates Sculpture Park. So what you begin to see here is the trace of the system of representation and wrapping of the cube and its effects on the kind of distortion of plants near and far of the folly. And some close-up views of the polycarbonate semicircular channels that begin to create this kind of repetition or hyper image of nature as edges and contours and silhouettes begin to repeat and almost in a kind of echo that begins to break and serialize the image of nature as we know it, and begins to call into question that its very form and edges. Looking at the construction of the folly, every project we like to take it all the way. In this particular case, looking at a project that was completely transparent, even its structure through glass and plastic, in order to convey that kind of distorted image of its content and its surrounding. This is a project we were engaged from 2019 up to now. It's a project in not far from you in Fort Worth, the client purchased this large lot and asked us to produce a small campus of 3 clinics. So this is a project we did together with a firm named Anonymous that generously brought us into the project as collaborators. We're co-authors of the first phase of the project. The project began with a simple question here, which was trying to question a little bit and work with the single 1-story suburban building, which is long and flat, and something that we found a little bit of a difficulty in trying to relate its program, its interiority with its facade making, and also the notion that we had to produce a campus, we had to produce 3 buildings and produce a kind of material character that seamlessly tied the projects together. That was the kind of central questions that we started to work with. So we brought the same idea that we had brought in the previous project of the Folly, which was to kind of conflate the flat space of the elevation or the orthographic space of the elevation and with oblique systems of projection like axonometry at oblique. So we decided to read on the 2-degree sloping ground from front to back that the lot had and use that as an opportunity to inject this oblique mode of viewing. So we ended up producing this 3-part volume that gets contorted in its profiles by these 3 scalonated boxes, but also begin to get inscribed with this projected axonometrics in its facades. We also wanted to work with the idea of a window and a shadow window, a version that begins to align to either the internal floor, the real window, and the shadow window begins to index the sloping ground and the sloping profiles and silhouette of each of the buildings. Here, what you begin to see is also the materiality of the project, which this particular part of Texas asked for something which we found a bit outdated. The project needed to be a pretty large amount made with masonry. Masonry referring to a solid material from the past, with low-bearing walls, referring to either concrete or brick or stone. So we decided to pick up on this idea, and we worked with brick veneer, and we wanted to question the degrees of freedom that one could begin to acquire once the project goes from a real material with low-bearing properties to a veneer, much like we did in the previous project, thick, when we go from real wood to wood veneer and use the grain of the project to compose and give certain ideas of depth, implied or real, that allow you to project 3-dimensional properties into each one of the volumes. So what you see here is a brick veneer that begins to get decomposed in the different seams, expansion joints, and shadow windows, and follows 2 different kinds of bonds, the running bond and the stack bond, and begin to show different kinds of texture and different kind of grain directions of the brick as you move along the elevation. Notice that the projection of the box from the oblique projections begins to wrap around the edges of the otherwise very simple 1-story building. I should say this image is courtesy of Anonymous, the firm we were co-authors in the first phase of the project. This is the second phase of the project, it's currently under construction. This is some images looking closely from the central courtyard to the 3 different buildings around the central courtyard. So the project was an opportunity to treat the facade a little bit like a drawing surface, employing materials that are somehow at some point regarded as banal by architects, and those include anything that is perhaps a veneer or a laminate or a decorative material. We wanted to find opportunities of expression that bring those forms of materiality to the process of drawing and texturing and hatching and rendering that we as architects do, and work specifically with the grain direction to question the very posture and in this case the very grounding of the object of the project in a sloping ground. To close the lecture with the last project, this is a project that was propositional, continues our interest on systems on display, made possible by architecture and its fixedness of the viewer and the tension that creates when viewers are invited to walk around, but also in this case when the project begins to move around. The competition was organized by the Everson Museum of Art in Syracuse University, where we were visiting professors a number of years ago. The brief called for a novel and active use of the Rosenfels collection, which is an extensive ceramic collection. The call was, in particular, the call asked for the collection to be used in a regular cafe, which was something new to us. That a piece of art will be regularly engaged with its visitor, touch, manipulated, drinking your coffee, eating your cake or your sandwich in a cafe through the work of art, for us was pretty interesting. And our proposal, which we call soft service, seek to further the use of the collection as a public-facing educational resource by offering the museum and cafe visitors an opportunity to participate in the curation and presentation of the ceramic collection. We brought together stationary and rotating display systems, borrowing from the encyclopedic tendencies of museological displays and also from the culinary tradition of Kaiten sushi. So we produce this conveyor belt, which produce a mobile still life, or we call that in our competition pitch, a mobile still life. In Kaiten sushi, the sensuousness of raw sushi is put on display and into service through its constant rotation between the restaurant and the kitchen, transforming dining into a creative and social act. In our proposal, the experience of visitors are similarly transformed through a mobile station which circulates the ceramic pieces. The pieces are put into use for display, but also more importantly for dining. We wanted to employ soft surfaces because we were from the beginning asking ourselves, like, what happens if the pieces fall, if they tumble in the conveyor belt? So the mobile stations are designed to fit within a landscape of soft seating and dining furniture. These soft pieces are constructed of playground rubber. We brought playground rubber into the museum and insulation foam to minimize that hazardous collision of ceramics and hard surface, while infusing the cafe with the inviting and warm atmosphere of play spaces. The mobile station offers an opportunity to present this seriality of making through what we call a seriality of viewing, that kind of rotation of the pieces around the product, invited also different ways to look at the product from a number of angles. We wanted to bring that condition that we had explored in other projects as just simply visitors walking around our project to, here looking at works of art and objects of daily use rotating around our project together with the visitors. So these categories of stationary and rotational systems for us are not fixed. Ceramic pieces from the encyclopedic wall, which is the wall that you see on the back on the piece second from the left. The pieces from that encyclopedic wall might exchange positions with the mobile system as they move from their stationary placement into the circulation in the cafe. Beyond the novel effect of ceramics on rotation, this system of display also invites visitors to experience the collection through the cafe activities of ordering, serving, and bussing, coupling the activities of consumption with activities of curation. So these two display schemes present an opportunity for curators and visitors alike to curate through selection and arrangement, putting material, color, form, and silhouette into intentional and accidental contrast with one another for visual reading. Thus, the everyday use of the work of art, it's always reorganized. Its canon, it's constantly reorganized and constantly rearranged by the expert and the non-expert by the kind of critical act of reordering, but also by its just very act of consumption. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maxi. That was a really great talk. So I think if you have, are you open for questions?
I am, of course. Sorry, I forgot to say I always am open for questions. So I invite any questions. I don't know if I took too long with the lecture. Probably.
No, it's great. It's great. Yeah, we our studios start. Some of them start at 1:30, so a few people have left, but and a lot of us had morning studios, so we'll be here for a little bit. And then you're coming on Monday, so I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions on your various trips here. But if you do have a question, feel free to throw it in chat or raise your hand if you're on Zoom, or if you're on YouTube, I can read it. So feel free to add it there. Maybe I'll start with a question, which is, I think what's so amazing about your work is a lot of it is about finding gaps in the everyday or in common spaces or common systems or programs. And it reminds me a little bit of like artificial intelligence, where one of the goals of creating artificial intelligence is to add interference to a system and hope that creatively the intelligence emerges from that interference. And one of the techniques you use is often distortion of something common in order to reveal something. So I guess my question is, if you ever find yourself in a situation where by using distortion to create these gaps, are you ever actually trying to conceal something that you might have revealed? I mean, one example is like just in today's world where conspiracies form at the gaps, like that would be the less creative, the more destructive. Is there ever a moment where you reveal something about the common that you want to then conceal in order to introduce something else?
I think that's a great question, Corey. And I like the connection that you draw to the moment in which we exist today about the simultaneity of different kinds of information, true or false. And I think it's a good it's a good situation in the kind of cultural moment in which we exist, and the way we circulate as information, and we also consume information. I would say the gaps we try to explore are meant to add questions to certain things that perhaps we take for granted, right? So whether it is about default commands that we associate to give, perhaps, in the one of the projects I talked about today about giving thickness to materials, or to accept the kind of pervasive condition of sheet materials in our construction world, or to accept the Instagram image as the mode of reception and dissemination of work. It's our work is always trying to exist within that gap and try to ask questions, so people kind of begin to re-ambition a little bit the task of the architect as a designer in infusing those moments of reflection, and also to try to put architecture to exist at that, we like to call it a theme, essentially a theme that begins to demand that you go through notions of representation, which we can go on and on talk about forever, but also notions of materiality, which I think is the inevitable outcome of architecture and the world that we need to engage. And as educators, I think we have the role constantly to begin to relate abstract processes to its inevitable everyday instantiation through materials that are either more or less pristine, that have more or less of an aura of being perhaps in some cases everyday or cheap, or widely available. So I think that's more or less where we try to exist. And whether we reveal things that we didn't want to reveal, or we find erroneous, or that will send the wrong message, I think we probably do. I think we curate a little bit the images and views that we put out for every project. Not all of them show with the same force that message I was talking about earlier. In some cases, that I think this perhaps true of every work. Some of those ideas get flattened or diluted, or the main thesis of the project begins to disappear or dissolve along more conventional systems. Those are perhaps the things that we try to edit out. We try to revise. The other area which I would say perhaps that's true is certain conditions of trying to exploit the tension between material and image, like I said earlier, sometimes can undermine the very integrity or structure of a project. So when we did thick, for example, at SCI-Arc, there was a whole question of the balancing of these objects, meaning that once people begin to walk around in those installations, like an architect, you're liable for the things not falling. They're a huge piece of furniture, but people are going to want to touch it. So the very act of flattening certain things and treating things like a thin veneer, you always have to re-examine those notions with pretty rational and pragmatic views of, like, can this thing stand? Can it lean? Can it fall? Does it can it pass the test of exist out there in the world without hurting people, falling, or breaking apart by itself, right? So those are the kind of I would say that those are the moments of truth, right? That's the truth that speaks back to you as a record of reality, right? So we like to we use this distinction in the office when we talk about products between the real and the render, right? Like, we try to bring all this idea of representation, but the real speaks back in ways that are unforgiving, right? So in some of the objects, I won't say which ones in that installation, some didn't pass that test. That the test was like, it needs to stay where it is. It can't move. It can't fall on top of people. So I would say, just a short answer, that moment is perhaps that moment of integrity, the one that I think every building or every construction needs to surpass or pass as a test.
Yeah, it's interesting because the dermatology project, you didn't want to use block, but then the project became about block. So in a lot of ways, it actually underlines or emphasizes the material that you're trying to conceal. But in a way that by flattening it, not using it in the conventional way, it starts to change its registration in some way. Yeah, any other questions? Let's see if here we have one online. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to the role of haptic experience in your work.
That's a great question. Yes, many of the products I showed today are not built. Like, for example, the Foley, the product in the Everson Museum with the mobile still life. We try to use systems of representation that once they enter the material world, they don't completely overpower it or dominate it. We're not material experts, but we enjoy very much the moment in which materiality kind of speaks back, whether it's distorting an image and making it repeat at a certain rate, or producing a kind of chiaroscuro. I didn't speak about this today, but somehow we also like to joke. We always find we find ourselves in positions in products where we always explore recesses, and those recesses begin to produce both a kind of chiaroscuro and a certain need for touching, and a very perhaps a mathematically controlled way. So that begins to exacerbate this notion of relief, this idea of a kind of haptic image that you kind of want to pass your finger through or comb your hand through in order to get in tune with its its more finer grain articulation. So this is another way of saying that we love drawing, like many of our peers of our generation, but we understand that once the work exists out there, drawing needs to become or give input to something else in a way. It doesn't have to become, just simply speaking, three-dimensionalized drawing in a way. Some projects allow for that better in a more direct or indirect way. In the Foley case, that became an intense glass striation. In the Texas project for the clinics, perhaps that's more direct, and that has to do with the with the medium of the material, in this case brick veneer, and finding ways or avenues to turn lines into real things that have a function, like an expansion joint or a grout texture, or a shadow window, which is a little bit of a an artificial add-on that we wanted to exert in the product in order to acknowledge that the ground was a little bit of a pain in the neck to deal with. The product was always sloping, and grading a product that large would have been too expensive. So I think that notion of relief, and the kind of haptic experience in some cases is more or less superficial, and find different according to the material at hand that the product puts forward.
Awesome, great answer. Any other questions here or online?
I think there are some comments.
Yeah, people excited to see you.
Yes, I'm excited to meet a lot of people. I've been communicating so long over email, and super excited to be there next week.
Yeah, it's going to be great. It's a great community, and everyone's looking forward to it. Yeah. Awesome, Maxi. Well, great to see you, and I guess we'll see you on Monday.
Thank you so much. I'll looking forward to meet everyone the school on Monday as we transition back in person. We're all very excited here too, so it should be great.
Yeah, Maxi, I just wanted to say I'm excited too. So looking forward to seeing you again on Monday.
Sorry, who was that? I only have two windows,
Michelle.
one Corey,
Yeah.
Michelle. So very nice to hear from you. Yeah, I'm excited to meet you again, and hoping to cross paths with everyone there soon.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Maxi. See you
Thank
very
you,
soon.
Corey. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, everyone.